Hey guys, welcome to another TGS podcast. Today we have Nick Horten on, and he's going to be talking about COVID-19 and how it has affected the police's opinion on shooting in the countryside, and also how it's going to affect the wildfowling season. Be warned that some of Nick's viewpoints are slightly alternative, however, as always, TGS is a forum of opinion, so enjoy. Hi Nick, how are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you keeping?
Very well, mate, very well. All healthy and well, I hope?
Yep, so far so good. I'm taking the social distancing seriously. Perhaps we might come on to elements of that in due course. But yes, my new status of being one of the higher risk groups means that I'm behaving myself.
Very wise too, hopefully. Very wise too. So I suppose, seeing as you mentioned it, let's start with that. What are your views? What is your current actions? How are you feeling about the whole thing?
Again, I've got to momentarily marshal my thoughts. I don't want to come across as some sort of conspiracy theorist, someone who is rabidly anti-police. And I feel that this is the appropriate time to say that I am in fact a retired officer with 25 years service. So I speak on police matters with perhaps the benefit of hindsight, and this is not a criticism at the boys and girls out on the street trying to do the job on a day-to-day basis. But having said that, and I think any of us who've perhaps looked at YouTube will have seen some clips of police overstretching the boundaries of common sense in terms of the enforcement of the current COVID regulations, even to a chief constable threatening the residents of his county that if they didn't toe the line, that he would have officers in shops inspecting the contents of their shopping bags to make sure that they didn't contain other than essential items. And of course, it just it opens the door to what is an essential item. 3 bottles of water and a loaf of bread. It's that has, of course, since been clarified with a sudden outbreak of common sense from the Home Office in that Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, came on the telly very shortly afterwards to say, no, you won't be doing that in point of fact, and you need to sort of go away, regroup, think carefully about what you're doing, and have another try, like stop using drones to watch 1 or 2 people walking in the middle of nowhere and then trying to suggest that they're going to be responsible for the death of all of us.
There is some great irony in that was an initial thing. He seems to have phased out a bit now. The whole, if you go for more than 2 walks a day, you are the end of the world sort of thing.
You are the Antichrist, yeah. And of course, what we now know, following some clarification from both the Crown Prosecution Service and in fact, I wrote down this particular acronym because I couldn't remember it, from the National Police Chiefs Council. They've given us some guidelines. You'll forgive my dogs barking in the background. It could be a parcel. My wife could be a parcel that the wife has been waiting days for. I'm sure he'll just leave it and go. But what's been clarified is that, for instance, if you want to go to take exercise, you can in fact drive to get there. Previously, it was being interpreted with police roadblocks that you can't drive anywhere. Well, apparently you can. And again, just to sort of put that into some sort of personal perspective, I saw online somewhere the other day that someone was talking about an invasion of the countryside by people, quite rightly, wanting to get a bit of fresh air, working as legitimately as they can within the confines of the regulations to get some exercise and not run the risk of contaminating other people, becoming contaminated themselves. But it came across that the countryside dwellers felt that this was some sort of invasion of their privacy. Well, I live on what was a former council estate. I've got footpaths running up the side of my house, at the front of the house across on the pavement. The house next door is rented by a GP. I've got care workers who are in and out of people's homes, old people's homes, on a daily basis. So from my perspective, the risk of infection, be that whatever, from simply stepping outside of my own front door is significantly greater than someone who lives in an isolated rural area. And for me and for many others in circumstances like mine, the safest place for them to be for those few hours of the day is when they jump in their car and drive to a remote area and take the appropriate exercise. So if you just translate that for a moment to the pigeon control, the legitimate pest control controversy that seems to have been raging, perhaps it's only on Facebook, I don't know, but the police have taken a whole variety of different views. There doesn't seem to be any unified standard from one end of the country to the other.
No, not at all.
That in itself is slightly disturbing, because what it means is that we have a piece of legislation that, in terms of its enforcement, is down to the opinion of an individual officer on the day, rather than him enforcing a set of words that give a set of circumstances where you know once you've crossed a particular line when you go from right to wrong. So what I would ask is, if you engage in legitimate pigeon pest control, for instance, and the police turn up for whatever reason, the officer, who probably has no rural background whatsoever, would then have to make a decision as to whether he felt that the activity that you were engaged in was in fact reasonable. Now, what parameters does he have to judge that against? What experience does he bring into play? How on earth does he do that? I think the whole thing is a cluster of, and I'm trying to use words that aren't completely offensive. I think as time progresses, it will kind of sort itself out. And perhaps the fundamental question that it begs is this one. Many people, again, on Facebook, because we're locked down, that's where much of my correspondence with other people is, seem to take the view, oh, don't forget pigeon shooting. And I mean, again, legitimate pigeon shooting where a crop is potentially being damaged. I certainly do not include just going out for a day shooting because you want to.
So the guys at the NGO put it very wisely of, it is a need versus want scenario. Is I want to go pigeon shooting. However, the places I go pigeon shooting don't need to be shot for pigeons at the moment. As much
exactly.
And I say need, I mean urgently need.
Yes, but there will be occasions, and I actually indulged in one of those a couple of Sundays ago with a freshly drilled field which was being raked over by pigeons and crows. The need to be there, but for COVID-19, is quite clear. Is that need in any way diminished by COVID-19 and the associated lockdown, call it what you will?
It is essential, in fact.
If it is, yes, absolutely. If it's essential, but the final question that it begs is this: if you argue that you don't need to engage in essential pigeon control where it is allowable, because it is allowable, there's no doubt about that, under the circumstances that we find ourselves in at the moment, you then lose the moral high ground and begs the question, well, if you didn't want to do it or couldn't do it or felt that you couldn't do it during the COVID outbreak, why would you want to do it now that it's finished?
So I think the point needs a little more refining than that it is a case of we are pushing the line of essential past where we usually would. So, for example, if a farmer usually saw a few hundred pigeons on his field, we would usually be there in a heartbeat to scare them off, to shoot them, to control their numbers. However, at the moment, we would probably now say that's mildly allowable because at the moment we are staying at home as much as possible.
Yeah.
So I think that we are pushing the line differently, but I do think there are occasions which are utterly essential that we go out pigeon shooting. And it has to be that way.
Yes, and I think again what it kind of boils down to is applying a bit of common sense. If otherwise you're being a good citizen as far as social distancing is concerned, and what you're talking about doing is going out into the countryside in a safe manner, because we know that you can drive. There's no the whole you shouldn't be driving business because you might have an accident and that will put the emergency services in jeopardy. Complete red herring. The government have said that you can drive to take exercise, so obviously the whole driving concept is not an issue as far as they're concerned. So what you're going to be doing is going out into the countryside to perform a valuable service to the farmer and by association to the rest of the community, because you're protecting our food supply, and you're going to be isolated in a way like no other because you're going to be in a field in the middle of nowhere.
And I do think that there is an element to this of it's a split, isn't it? I totally agree that there is some irony that we can go for a walk down the high street of town, whichever town you may live in, or in your case, walk outside your front door, but cannot go and hang out for the day in a pigeon hide. It's a split thing, isn't it? One has to be socially responsible, and as a shooter, we have to be seen to be socially responsible, whether it is logical or commonsensical or not. To be seen if we're all out shooting at a time when everybody is the opinion where we should stay at home. Sorry, I thought I turned that on silent. We have to, as a community, be seen to be towing that line, however much it is illogical.
I absolutely agree, and this I think is where we have to be careful that we don't kind of split the hair too much. I'm talking about occasions when it is justifiable. I'm not talking about just going shooting because you fancy going. Oh, it's a nice day today. I'm going to go and sit in the pigeon hide. You know, the chances of getting much are not great, but I just fancy a day out. No, that is not what the regulations suggest that you should be doing. But you live within the Hampshire Constabulary area. Now, I haven't actually received this yet, either in an email or a letter form, but there was a correspondence from the Hampshire Constabulary Firearms Department fairly recently, I believe. I've seen it on the Basque website. I've seen many copies of it elsewhere, so I'm happy to believe that this document exists. And it's advice from the Firearms Department as to what you can and can't do, allegedly, during the current crisis. And what it actually is a police officer's opinion as to what he would like to see happen or not happen. And I find it extremely offensive, the tone that it's written in, that we should be. Give me a second. Let me just turn that off. That we should be talked to like children, as members of one of the most responsible user groups that the police have any dealings with. We've all been vetted by the police. We are all people who meet a certain social criteria, and yet they choose to correspond with us in a way that treats us like naughty school children, and they're wagging their finger at us and threatening us with the loss of our shotgun certificates under certain, when you actually read them, imaginary sets of circumstances, even if you didn't lose it permanently. Because I think I don't believe that there have been any revocations of certificates for again, people going out and doing what they are permitted to do during the current crisis, and it just kind of smacks to me as the police taking this opportunity to do what they did with the legislation that relates to shotgun certificates and the appropriate medical approval, in that they just pulled ahead and did it, despite the fact that the Home Office, the medical profession, well, it's a whole complex issue. Let's not break that one down at the moment. But basically, the police said, you're not going to get your shotgun certificate unless you supply us with a copy of your medical records signed off by your GP to say you're not a nutter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the concept of that is fine. I don't have a problem with that at all. But it's the way that the police have implemented it, which is technically outside of the law as it stands at the moment, and the Home Office advice that they're supposed to work within. And it begs the question, they've done that. I got a horrible suspicion that when this lot blows over, one of the things that we might find is that increasingly police will ask for people, when they're going out into the countryside to go shooting, to notify them that they're going.
I mean, they have asked for that in the past, though, haven't they?
They have done under certain circumstances. I think that's probably not a bad idea. An example I can give you is that my wildfowling club has had for the last 15 years an arrangement with the Hampshire Constabulary that we have information available to them, which means that if they get a telephone call from a member of the public seeing one of our blokes out on the marsh, they have the option of making a phone call to us, and again, to shorten the story, we can tell them whether that person is one of our members or not, and they can deploy accordingly. Now, the last time that was tripped, the police decided not to use it and to deploy an officer to the site who had no idea what he was talking about, no idea where he was going. It was a complete communication
danger. Now, having been with you out into the mud, a huge potential danger.
Yes, but again, my personal experience is that given the tools to make their job easier, the police seem not to want to use them.
I mean, we have, we obviously have received probably a few hundred inquiries as to whether people are allowed to go out or not pigeon shooting, and or pest controlling generally. And our answer has been fairly blanket of yes, providing a certain set of criteria. Firstly, it is actually vaguely essential. Okay, if you're shooting foxes where there's lambs, go and shoot them. If you're shooting crows where there's lambs, go and shoot them. If you're shooting pigeons on drillings, go and shoot them. Secondly, get a letter from the farmer. It is only logical that you get the evidence from the farmer himself requiring you to go and do it, because the farmer says it's essential, not on a hearsay or a statement, or else anybody could go and do it. And any farmer or permission owner worth their salt will give you that letter. I mean,
I have, again, as an audit trail to cover your own backside, I have no problem with that whatsoever. My fear is that if we, in our keenness to be doing the right thing, that we're actually inviting the police to carry on with that set of circumstances once the immediate need with the COVID-19 has been removed.
You see, they might like what we're doing a little bit too much.
I think they might, and I mean, again, it begs a whole variety of questions. In my day, when I joined the police in the Hampshire Constabulary in 1974. Now, in 1974, everything was different. It was a different world, but the police did not see any need at that time. If they got a telephone call from a member of the public saying there's a bloke in a field with a load of plastic decoys in a hide with a dog shooting pigeons, I want you to come out and see what he's doing. kind of scenario, well, the response that they would have given would have been, well, he's pigeon shooting, just jog on. But we've now got to the stage where the whole, and I can understand why that might be, but there's a difference between somebody in the streets of a city yelling Allah Akbar and waving an AK-47, which might well require an immediate deployment, against a bloke in a field shooting pigeons. We seem to have got to the stage now where the police feel the need to respond to incidents of like the second one with the same degree of manpower and potential force deterrent as they would with the first. And I can't quite see how they arrive at that conclusion. Basque, everyone hates Basque at the moment, but Basque has done a huge amount of work, particularly in Hampshire, with the control room staff and their supervisory officers to try and explain to them what happens on a day shooting, be it driven, wildfowling, pigeon shooting. We'll stick with that. They've had significant input into the preparation of a lot of the documents that the police go through. You can imagine. Someone answers a telephone call in the police headquarters. They're not experts on everything that comes across their desk, so they get to the stage where it might pop up a pro forma where there are a few questions that they need to answer. There's been some significant input into that so that they ask the right kind of questions, which can guide the response that they deliver thereafter. But there are many, many occasions when that is just being ignored.
Very interesting.
So there you go. I've bashed the old bill for the last 10 or 15 minutes. I wish
they'll knock at your door fairly shortly, I'm sure.
Well, I'm sure they will. I wish them no malice, but I just wished that there would be an outbreak of common sense in the application of some of the restrictions that we're looking at. Less finger wagging and less trying to exceed the powers that are clearly laid down, or indeed not laid down in law, to suit their own ends.
I mean, one does not envy them. We do live in, well, the southeast of England has a third to half of the population of England in it. We do live in the most densely populated part of the UK, and I don't envy them trying to handle the rural-urban conflict that we have here, which is much more intensive than it is in the rest of the country. So I don't think Hampshire have a particularly easy job when it comes to, yes, that interaction between pigeon shooters and
no, I would be the first to agree with that, but as time progresses, I see that the efforts of shooting organisations to bring the police up to speed, to give them the tools to deal with these jobs with the greatest efficiency. And I mean, like all these things, this boils down to money at the end of the day. Do I need to send a two-car firearms response unit to a bloke in a field who is patently, when you examine the attendance circumstances, shooting pigeons?
One does wonder whether there is a element of using it as a training exercise sometimes. Having heard multiple stories of it happening, you go, perhaps it is just we've got something to do here, let's go and train for the real thing.
Well, I can give you, I won't give you the chapter and verse because this happened not that long ago and it would be identifiable. The police attendants at a job which concerned my wildfowling club, a well-meaning member of the public had phoned in some information. The duty inspector elected to send a firearms team comprised of two parts, one of which came from Portsmouth, the other one came from Winchester. Now, I learned subsequently from, as I say, as a retired police officer, I know lots of people still in the police service and have regular dealings with them. The overall cost of the turnout for that particular job, and there were other components involved in it, was getting on for £12,000. And I know that the inspector who permitted it or caused it to take place, if that's the right word, received a second bumhole, because the subsequent investigation found that he had just decided to treat it as a training exercise, ignored everything that was put in place to prevent that enormous wastage of money, but just did it anyway.
Wow. So moving off of this before we go around any more. So
any more circles?
That is the one, yeah. Let's look at the wildfowling season. I've spoken to a few people regarding the game shooting season, and well, there's a huge mixed feeling there. I presume the wildfowlers aren't in that same boat.
No, we are in a slightly different boat. We did wonder when the excrement hit the air circulatory system as to what the effects on us would be. Quite a few of our members we thought might have been in jobs which would be affected by the lockdown. We're now well into the period of acceptance of club subscriptions, which obviously have to pay for the leases for the coming season. And pretty much all of our members seem to be unaffected by it, which is
found the money because it's an important part of their life.
Well, yes, exactly that. Because it's a club and there is a strong sort of family element to it. One of the things that we said right from the outset was, if you have any issues about paying, with finance, give the club treasurer a ring in complete confidence, and you can work something else. You can work something out with him. We also looked at our own finances, and we determined that there was a number of members who, provided they met certain criteria, we could actually fund their entire membership for next season. It wouldn't have been free. They'd have had to have paid it back at some point, but certainly they would not have had to have found the money for the coming season. And equally, I know of one club, unless it's changed its mind and perhaps had a bit of an outbreak of common sense as well, but they took a decision, because they had quite a bit of money in their club funds, that their entire membership would not pay any subscriptions for the coming season, which was really, really generous of them. Whether they're regretting that and whether it's actually happened, it's gone a bit quiet, but it is an illustration of the difference between game shooting and more general types of shooting and the sort of family feeling that you get within a wildfowling club. Our whole finances are different in the sense that we don't have to look at purchasing and releasing large numbers of birds. The birds turn up or don't turn up entirely of their own volition, and it doesn't cost anything.
So I've interestingly been speaking to a couple of people regarding deer, and I'm wondering if this has any relation. The movements of deer and all large animals and small animals has been very much affected by this. Obviously, they have a routine that happens year on year in the countryside, a regular amount of visitors, people, a regular amount of stalkers and pressures, and as such, populations don't change too much, or they seem to change in a similar fashion. I've spoken to various people who have said deer are moving more or less than they ever have, or wild boar included in that, and it will affect ongoing how populations look. For example, a friend of mine said he's seen fallow on his ground. He's never seen fallow there before, but they've probably taken the opportunity to cross a main road that they usually do not. Do you think that this will affect wildfowl in any similar way?
In the sense that the majority of wildfowl that we're looking to harvest next season, the widgeon, for example, most of them are in Arctic Russia at the moment. Likewise, most of the other migratory birds, they're a long way away in an area which, irrespective of what's going on with COVID on an international basis, they are in the middle of absolute nowhere, and it's having no effect that I can imagine upon what they do. Local populations of mallard and Canada geese might be influenced in the sense that some bodies of water which might otherwise be attractive to a bird as a nesting area, because obviously we're right into the middle of the beginning of the nesting season, which in past years have been untenable because of pressure from walkers or what have you, that particularly mallard, Canada geese and indeed feral greylags might well find them more suitable as nesting areas. So from that point of view, it would be interesting to see how that works out next year. But generally speaking, I don't think that we're going to see the same sort of effect that you're describing as taking place with deer.
Well, I suppose where you say most things are migratory and they're all in a bloody wilderness anyway, that shouldn't be a huge deal. And I also presume, therefore, because of the nature of wildfowling, social distancing isn't going to affect wildfowling at all.
No, I, again, using my crystal ball, I think that we might be getting towards a point at some stage in the future where social distancing continues, but otherwise movement and certain other interaction becomes more easily carried out. As you've seen yourself, most wildfowling is done with one or two people. Socially distancing under those circumstances is very easy indeed. It's not like having to move a busload of beaters or guns, or have a sit-down lunch. All the things that might potentially impinge on other forms of shooting simply don't apply. So if we get the off on the 1st of September, for the entire wildfowling community to maintain a workable and effective social distancing is perfectly feasible. The one thing that I thought that we might have seen, but we haven't, other clubs may have noticed this, is that there might be people, keen shots, whose years shooting particularly included one of two sorts of thing, either buying a gun in a smaller syndicate or spending their money on bought days here and there. And we did rather think that we might see an increase of applications of membership for people who perhaps took the view that with all the uncertainty and the financial risk involved with the bigger shoots, that they might not invest in the birds, that there might not be any shooting, and that a year or two's membership to a wildfowling club was kind of better than nothing. But that seems not to have happened, which is an interesting reflection on game shooters, because generally speaking, they seem to be quite upbeat about what's going to happen next year in some way, shape, or form. They're certainly not looking for alternative forms of shooting that I can detect.
No, I think generally many people are quite positive still about some form of game shooting. I think is the thing. Is many shoots, or at least I think so. From what I understand, all the big shoots that generally run off of foreign clients and big bag days from very rich people have ceased or mothballed. And everyone who perhaps is the smaller syndicates is people such as me who take a couple of smaller days here and there. Those shoots are more than likely still going ahead because they can afford to lose that amount of money. Even though, or they will be able to make it work in some way, regardless of that's just if it's instead of a driven day, we have a 6-man team walk up and we all stay 20 feet apart. So it is manageable to do some form of hunting in that regard. And it's still easier and warmer than wildfowling.
Indeed, yes, and in fact, the something that just horrified me as I think about this, with the shoulder gunning, the social distancing is perfectly feasible. My greatest pleasure is accrued from punt gunning, where two of you are in the tiny cockpit of a boat, and when you're actually setting into the birds, I usually end up manning the punt gun, but my colleague is practically laid on top of me from behind, so to speak. Don't read anything into that. But we are not going to be able to manage any form of social distancing there, which is an interesting challenge for the coming season.
I can appreciate that. The only thing I can recommend is that you go with someone you don't socially distance with. I think convincing your wife to be your 2IC in the punt might be a bit harder, but it is your only option. So there you go.
Indeed it is, yes. I have to go away and give some thought to that. And that has just occurred to me now. That is slightly worrying. We'll have to see where we end up come the start of the season.
Is there anything you'd like to add on that wildfowling front?
One thing I did mean to mention right back at the beginning, because it's often lost in our busy days. Happy St. George's Day.
Happy St. George's Day. Is a happy Thursday even. I mean, that's still quite a big deal that we remember what day it is.
Yes, well, that's very true. I've got a couple of emails. I'm technically I'm at work at the moment, but I've got to knock out a few emails shortly, because one email that I sent yesterday thought that today was Friday, so I have to sort of correct that a bit. I've just lost a day somewhere completely.
It's not easy.
No, especially when you get to my age. As somebody said, I'm 65, and the other day I had a tattoo.
How was that for you?
It was my name and address. So on that note, have we flogged it all to death?
I'm happy that we've covered everything we wanted to discuss today, unless there's anything else you'd like to discuss.
No, and I apologise for being so inflammatory, but I think it had to be said. There will be many people who don't share my view. Only with the passage of time will we see where this all pans out.
Indeed, Nick. And I think every point of view is valid, and we've had some points of view on here that are more politically attached, and it's always good to have your view, which is most definitely not, which is wonderful.
Cheers, mate. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
And you, mate. You take care, and hopefully we'll be able to see each other soon.
Indeed, yes. Look forward to it.